how a NASA-funded experiment led to a physically intimate bond between researcher Margaret Howley-Lovett and a dolphin in the 1960s. Margaret Lovett was part of a NASA-funded project to speak with dolphins. Soon she was living with Peters 24 hours a day in a converted house. Christopher Riley reports on an experiment that went terribly wrong. When a young Carl Sagan visited St. Thomas's Dolphin Point Laboratory in 1964, he likely didn't know how controversial the setting would become. Sagan belonged to a secretive group called the Order of the Dolphin, which, despite its name, focused on looking for extraterrestrial intelligence. Also in the group was quirky neuroscientist Dr. John Lilly. His 1961 quasi-sci-fi book Man and Dolphin highlighted the idea that dolphins wanted to, and likely, communicate with humans. Lilly's work sparked a scientific interest in interspecies communication that set in motion an experiment that went a bit, trying to connect dolphins and humans. Astronomer Frank Drake led the National Radio Astronomy Observatory's Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia. He'd led Project Ozma, the search for extraterrestrial life through radio waves emitted from other planets. Upon reading Lilly's book, Drake excitedly drew similarities between his own work and Lilly's. Drake helped the doctor secure funding from NASA and other government entities in order to achieve his vision: a communicative bridge between humans and dolphins. Lilly then built a laboratory housing a workspace on the upper floor and a dolphin enclosure on the bottom. Tucked away on the beautiful shore of the Caribbean, he called the Alabaster Building Dolphin Point. When 23-year-old local Margaret Howley-Lovett learned that the lab existed, she drove there out of sheer curiosity. She happily remembered stories from her youth where talking animals were some of her favorite characters. She'd hoped to somehow watch the breakthrough that could see those stories become reality. Arriving at the lab, Lovett met its director, Gregory Bateson, a famous anthropologist in his own right. When Bateson inquired as to Lovett's presence, she answered, "Well, I heard you had dolphins, and I thought I'd come and see if there was anything I could do." Bateson allowed Lovett to watch the dolphins. Perhaps wanting to make her feel helpful, he asked her to take notes while observing them. Both he and Lilly noticed her intuitiveness, despite any lack of training, and offered her an open invitation to the lab. Margaret Howley-Lovett becomes a diligent researcher soon. Margaret Howley-Lovett's commitment to Lilly's project intensified. She worked hard with the dolphins named Pamela, Sissy, and Peter. Through daily lessons, she encouraged them to make human-esque sounds. But the process was becoming tedious, with little sign of progress. Margaret Howley-Lovett hated going in the evenings and still felt that there was much work left to do. So she got Lilly to let her live in the lab, waterproofing the upper rooms and flooding them with a couple feet of water. This way, humans and dolphins could share the same space. Lovett picked Peter for the revamped, immersive language experiment. They coexisted in the lab 6 days of the week, and on the 7th day, Peter spent time in the cage with Pamela and Sissy.
Something that he could follow. That they were very good at. The enunciation was not good. But if I said...
Through all of Peter's speech lessons and voice training, Lovett learned that when we had nothing to do, that was when we did the most. He was very, very interested in my anatomy. If I was sitting here and my legs were in the water, he would come up and look at the back of my knee for a long time. He wanted to know how that thing worked, and I was so charmed by it. Charmed might not be the word to describe how Lovett felt when Peter, a teenage dolphin with certain urges, became a bit more excited. She told reporters that he would rub himself on my knee, my foot, or my hand. Moving Peter back down to the enclosure each time this happened became a practical nightmare. So, reluctantly, Margaret Howley-Lovett chose to satisfy the sexual urges of the dolphin manually. It was just easier to incorporate that and let it happen. It would just become part of what was going on, like an itch. Just get rid of that scratch, and we will be done and move on. Lovett says, "It wasn't sexual on my part. Sensuous, perhaps. It seemed to me that it made the tie closer, not because of the sexual action, but because of the lack of having to keep breaking. And that's really all it was. I was there to get to know Peter. That was part of Peter." Meanwhile, Drake's curiosity about Lilly's progress grew. He sent one of his friends, the 30-year-old Sagan, to check on the goings-on at Dolphin Point. Drake was disappointed to learn that the nature of the experiment was not as he'd hoped. He had expected progress in understanding the dolphin language. This was likely the beginning of the end for Lilly and his crew's funds. Nevertheless, Lovett's connection to Peter grew even as the project waned. But by 1966, Lilly was more fascinated by the mind-altering power of LSD than he was by dolphins. Lilly was exposed to the drug at a Hollywood party by the wife of Ivan Tors, the producer of the movie Flipper. I saw John go from a scientist with a white coat to a full-blown hippie, Lily's friend Rico Berry remembered. Lily belonged to an exclusive group of scientists licensed by the government to study the effects of LSD. He dosed both himself and the dolphins at the lab. But not Peter, Aunt Lovat's urging. Luckily, the drug seemed to have little to no effect on the dolphins. However, Lily's new cavalier attitude towards the animal's safety offended Bateson and put a stop to the lab's funding. Thus, Margaret Howe Lovett's live-in experience with the dolphin ended. That relationship of having to be together sort of turned into really enjoying being together, wanting to be together and missing him when he wasn't there, she reflects. Lovett balked at Peter's departure to Lily's cramped Miami lab with little sunshine. A few weeks later, some terrible news. John called me himself to tell me, Lovett notes. He said Peter had committed suicide. Rico Berry of the Dolphin Project and Lily's friend validate the use of the word suicide. Dolphins are not automatic air breathers like we are. Every breath is a conscious act. If life becomes too stressful, the dolphins just take a breath and they sink to the bottom. A heartbroken Peter didn't understand the split. The sadness of losing the relationship was too much. Margaret Howe Lovat was saddened but eventually relieved that Peter didn't need to endure life at the confined Miami lab. He wasn't going to be unhappy. He was just gone, and that was okay. Lovat stayed in St. Thomas after the failed experiment. She married the original shooter who worked on the project. Together, they had 3 girls and converted the abandoned Dolphin Point laboratory into a home for their family. Margaret Howe Lovat didn't speak openly about the experiment for nearly 50 years. Recently, however, she gave interviews to Christopher Riley for his documentary on the project, aptly named The Girl Who Talked to Dolphins.